take everything away from me and I'll start over again on Monday and start building again. Like that's just what I think resilience is.
This week on the Shameless Podcast.
My dad, he's behind me and he's got the 1x2 ready to go at me. And I turned around and I said, Dad, can't you see my spirit is broken? I don't need a spanking. I'm already broken. Leadership isn't always something that you should or can declare about yourself, because a leader can be right 1,000 times and wrong once, and they're considered a bad leader. Now I've built up that tolerance. Now think about it. When that happened in my 20s, I was tearful. I was crushed. Now it happened in my mid-40s, 20 years later, and I was just like, yep, knew this was coming. I think we think, well, if I choose not to be hurt, I'm just not going to be hurt. But it's not that easy. Hurt is hurt. The key in resilience is not that you never have to stop. It's that authority meant what you could tell other people you've done. Now authority means what you always start at the finish line.
The quote of the episode is, I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. Sometimes we are afraid to do something. You fear shame. I don't want shame. We're trying to break that burden by sharing stories of courage, resilience, and we want to be able to celebrate your story.
Shameless.
Shameless family, welcome to another Friday. You know what? It's seldom that you have DK and DM having a discussion more so than anything. And I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to Dennis Meador, and friends call him DM, just like friends call me DK. Dennis, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I always tell people when when I'm first introducing, they go by both. I'm like, listen, my friends call me DM. So if you call me Dennis, I'll just assume you don't want to be friends and I'll take the hint.
And you know what? That's exactly what I say to my, I'm like, if you're calling me DK, then we're really,
yep,
you're really trying. But if you're not, then I know I got the signal, I got the hint, and it's fine. No hard feelings. So
exactly.
Like minds, I really appreciate it. And so today's discussion actually is going to be about authoritative positioning and personal branding. And Dennis has had a really interesting sort of journey, not only from his childhood, but also then his leadership positioning, how he sort of built himself to be where he is right now. And I think the idea of not only rebranding, but even further than that, being able to use your brand and authoritative positioning is going to be something really interesting that we're going to talk about today. And without really trying to go too deep into it, I'm going to ask Dennis if you could please just introduce yourself to the audience, a little bit about yourself, and then just jump straight into it.
Sure. So I am a lifelong entrepreneur, lifelong leader, if you will. I started my first business when I was an early teenager, about 14. I was a youth pastor when I was 16. I was a pastor when I was 18. I got married when I was 19. I had my first business when I was 20. And I've had businesses since then. I just glossed over my childhood faster than I ever have. So into my 20s, I started, I was pastoring a church. At the same time, I always had at least one company, maybe two at different times. And so I've always been in a position of leadership, basically since I'm the oldest of 6 kids, so I'm the oldest brother, so I can't help but be in that position.
It is a lot of pressure because I mean, eldest of 6, a youth pastor, and then running businesses at the same time, and you're only 16. The amount of pressure or stress that must have brought to you.
I'm so old, we didn't talk about stress when I was young.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool.
We're just like, fuck up. You go to somebody and they're like, you signed up for it. It's your fault. If you can't do it, then just quit, you wimp. So that's how it was when I was that age. So I didn't know any better.
Okay, you didn't know any better. But sorry, I'll keep quiet. I really found that very fascinating. But I want to come back to that buckle up and stop being a wimp.
Yeah,
portion
no
of
problem.
the conversation.
So, I've been in the digital marketing realm since early 2000s. I've been in marketing really my whole career since I was 18. So 30 years, 20 plus years in digital. And, I have, even when I'm not in a leadership position, I'll end up in a leadership position. I went into corporate for about 4 or 5 years in Austin, and I was just another sales guy. But I think if you ask most people that were there, the 500-600 people in that office, they would say, well, yeah, he was a another salesperson, but he wasn't just another salesperson because of my success, because I mentored people and invested into other people, which wasn't something I needed to do, it was something I wanted to do. Then I got back into the entrepreneur thing after corporate. This has now been, I'm roughly about 40 years old, so 7, 8 years ago, with my partner that I had before this for about 5 years. And then 2 years ago, he exercised his buyout, which I'm fine. Take everything away from me and I'll start over again on Monday and start building again. Like that's just
Gosh.
what I think resilience is, right? So I took out a notebook that I keep, and this notebook has business ideas, actionable at a moment's notice, usually 20 to 30 good ones that I can start at any time. And, 30 to 50, like kind of like just ethereal ones, restaurants, things I would never do. But usually there's a good 20 to 30, like this is what I could do. So when I got the word from my partner that he was executing the buyout, I was 5 months away from my wedding. I went to my now wife and said, hey, the money I've been making, taking care of everything, brought us out on this island and we don't have, I was like, in 5 months, that money will no longer be appearing in our account. So I got to start something, baby. And she's like, you got this. And I started it. And here we are a little over 2 years later, or I guess right at 2 years later from when I got that email, 18 months from when we officially launched. We did 7 figures our first year. We grew from 2 people to 30 people our first year. Now we're rounding the corner to our second year. We're about 60 people. We're probably not going to double, but probably pretty close, 1.8, 1.9, something like that from year one in revenue. And we've got a ton of stuff just getting ready to come out to make us and take us to that next level. So that kind of brings me to today. I'm fortunate. I spend most of my time either on podcasts, working and leading my company, just basically developing, cultivating, and leading people, which is really my core competencies. And so being able to stay in that place of your core competency is always the biggest key to success.
And, so you are largely focused within the attorney and the legal profession space currently?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And so when you say about really focusing on your core competencies, was that the sort of the structure that you then followed and why you're in this legal space? Or was there a particular thing that pushed you to then just focus so strongly in that legal space?
I was recruited into the legal space 22 years ago. And, I'd already been selling 3, 4, 5 years. I'd already been doing script process and all of that. But what I learned when I started working with attorneys, and this is early 2000s, personal injury attorneys primarily is who I worked with. And what I learned was their temperament and their penchant for logic and their openness to having discussions was something that lent well to me. I was the kid who always argued, who all the adults said, you should be an attorney when you grow up, right? And it wasn't an argument like yelling. It was more just like presenting logical reasoning behind why I should get what I want. For example, I'll give you one example. Some people, I think you maybe experience this, but like I grew up in a family that whooped your butt when you were misbehaving. So, I know that's not a thing today, but back then, very common, very expected. Being the oldest of 6 kids, I got in a lot of trouble. Most times, even if I didn't do it, I would just take the blame for it because I was so used to being in trouble. It was just like, you know what? My little sister doesn't need a whooping. I'll take it. It's no big deal. Now, my dad, he didn't like whooping me, but my stepmom liked it when he did. So I remember one time I had caused some sort of trouble and my stepmom was like, spank him. He needs a spanking. Give him a spanking. So my dad takes me in the room and we had just had a class at our church about like family and why you should, one of the things they talked about is biblical spanking of a child. And one of the things they talked about was that spanking was not to hurt a child, it's to break their spirit so that they submit to you. And so I remember my dad, he's behind me and he's got the 1x2 ready to go at me. And I turned around and I said, Dad, can't you see my spirit is broken? I don't need a spanking. I'm already broken. So that was kind of my that gives you a snapshot into my childhood, and just being that kind of person who has always, not been afraid to say what they needed to say. But working with lawyers, working with attorneys, what I have learned through the years is there's going to be discussion. But if you can make sure that you keep yourself on a equal level with whoever you're talking to, in this case, the legal industry, it just fit for me because I could say, well, yeah, I hear you, but what about this? And have you considered this? And, and they'd be like, you know what? that makes sense. And I'll be honest with you, at 22, 23, I mean, I graduated high school summa cum barely, right? 2.43 GPA. I just saw the other day 1,012 out of 15 and 42 ranking in my class in high school. That was my ranking, 1,012 out of 1542. So, here's this kid, bottom third of the class. I didn't even get my diploma when I walked because I had to go in the next day and do a piece of homework so that one teacher could pass me. So, and I went to an unaccredited Bible Institute. And yet here I am talking to people who have 10 years of schooling and they argue for a living. And I could have this discussion with them and be like, they would come to the end of it and be like, you know what? Not all the time, obviously, but often enough for it to make money sense for me. I can't remember that word right now, but financial sense for me. I mean, attorneys have just been a good fit for my personality. And so that's why I've kind of stayed in that place. Plus, when you're good at something most people aren't good at, you should stay good at that, right?
Double time. Yeah. I mean, why go and seek like something more complicated? It's hard enough running a business, starting a business and moving it from point A to point B. But, you highlighted something sort of about your upbringing, right? And how that has shaped the person that you are now. And I'm extremely curious as to just a sneak peek into what do you believe that your upbringing, good or bad, has really brought to you and shaped the person that you are now, even more so about how you started your business and some of the most important attribute that you needed in order to be able to continue driving and rebranding yourself in the different businesses that you've been in.
I would say there's a few things. One, obviously, like I said, being the oldest of 6 kids, kind of being a natural born leader, if you will. And, I hate using that statement about myself. I feel like that's something that can only be said about you, but it's been said about me enough that I kind of just resign to the fact that people at least consider that about me. Right.
Yeah.
So, being the oldest of 6 kids, just kind of always being at the forefront, the kid who made people laugh, the kid who could have a conversation with a 9-year-old woman in church. And that was the thing. I grew up in church. So my friends weren't 5 to 7-year-olds while I was 5, 6, 7, 8 to 10-year-olds. My friends have always been like old ladies, teenagers, young and old, whatever. And I'm still that way. The other day we were at the truck stoppage down the road from us, and one of my buddies over there, he's like a 22-year-old kid here on the island, and he's like, DM, where have you been, man? And I came and we dapped up and we talked about this and that, and just kind of shot the breeze for a little bit. And my wife's just like, how are these people your friends? Everywhere you go, everybody's your friend. So, that when you're that person and it's naturally who I am. It's not something I put on. It's not something I feel like, I got to put on DM today. Hello, everybody. DM's here. I've got to actually I have to be myself or myself light version. There's only 2 versions of me. There's full me and there's the light version of me. You're still going to get drunk, but it'll take you on an extra beer or 2.
Yeah. But then I've got a curious aspect to it. Would you say then that the idea of leading is purely something that you've grown up as in inherent? Is this something that you can learn? And
I think it's
even as you've grown, have you learned certain things about leadership?
Absolutely. One, I do think that anything can be cultivated if you have the desire, the access, and the intelligence. Anything can be cultivated. I could be a badass fighter. Well, maybe not now. I'm 48 and overweight, so I'm probably never going to be a badass fighter. You're never going to be a UFC guy.
Those knees aren't going to let you know.
Nope. But I do think that, especially in personality traits, things like that, we can teach ourselves to be more empathetic. Even if it's just an internal trigger that we learn, we can teach ourselves to be willing to be a leader, to do the things that we know leaders do. And, like I talked about earlier, leadership isn't always something that you should or can declare about yourself. Because how many people say, well, I'm a leader, and then you turn around and there's no one behind them. So who are you leading? Sorry, are you not allowed to cuss on your show, DK? Let's try that again, just in case. Who are you leading?
We're here. We're
you know what I mean?
Go ahead and cuss. It's all right. Not a problem.
Okay. But seriously, you'll see these people and they're like, I'm a leader. And you're like, okay, what are you leading? And you can lead yourself. And that's probably the hardest person to lead, but when you say I'm a leader, the implication is there are people following you.
Yeah. And so would you say, or maybe to then go back a little bit within your childhood, things that were tough that then helped you build you to be the person that you are today?
Sure, absolutely. So one, caring about others more than myself. I spent 5 years not worrying about what was going to happen to me. I cared about what was going to happen to my sister and what was going to happen to my mom. So a leader must be at least a portion. A good leader, I think, should have a portion of themselves that is selfless. You know, I think that learning to put the needs, the wants, the desires intrinsically, inherently, whatever Lee word that you want to insert here needs to be a part of the DNA of a leader. So that was certainly one thing. Hyper awareness. You know, I give this illustration sometimes. You know, when we would go visit, my mom would take us down the block and she'd say, "Oh, here's my friend Susan." And I knew, let's say she's 2 blocks away, I would be looking around the house. What kind of food do they have in the fridge? Is this house filthy? What kind of, do they have bedrooms? Do they have extra people sleeping here? Is this lady really friendly? Why would I ask myself that? Because it could very well be at 2, 3, 4 in the morning sometime relatively soon. I could be at their doorstep with my mom and my sister behind me crying because whoever my mom was with at the time ended up being, getting drunk or coming back and there's, an altercation. And so I literally would learn wherever I was going. Same thing with food. Like I was always paying attention, how much does food cost at this grocery store? Most 8-year-olds don't think about that. How much does food cost at this, gas station? How much is this? How much is that? If I give this guy, $12.37 worth or 35 cents worth of cans, is he going to give me $12.50 or even $13 because he feels a little sorry for me versus this other person over here that always gives me the exact amount? So you learn to become hyper aware of what's happening so that as you grow in life, that just translates to other things. Now I'm looking at my business and I'm looking at this person and I'm looking at that person. I'm looking at this thing going on, that client. And so I'm constantly like a million different things going on in my head. And sometimes people ask me, well, what do you, and I'm just like, I'll tell them and they're like, wow, you got all of that from that. And it's like, I mean, you're getting the light version, but sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd say those are 2 areas that applied from childhood into real life: hyper awareness and putting the needs of others before myself.
That's very interesting. And so then that whole idea of putting your needs before others, but even that hypersensitive nature, there's a large portion of it that has to do with you, your own identity, who you are as a person. Versus, and then as you go and you get into this sort of these leadership roles, whether it's a youth pastor, whether it's starting your business, not surely, but have you had moments where there was a conflict between who you are versus how people should view you or how you want it to be viewed?
I think one of the biggest events of that was when in my first business partnership, I had, as I said, I'd lived in Romania for a little bit, and then I moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma to start a second branch at his behest, his suggestion. I went in, opened a second branch, product that I invented, script that I had written, and now I've got 15 or 20 people working for me. And I get a few months into it, and he basically said, "Oh, my lawyer says that you are now competing. You've broken our non-compete, so I'm not going to send you money anymore." So now I've got like 15, 20 people. I'm financing out of my own pocket to build this office. And over the next month or 2, I had to start letting people go, including my own sister, my brother-in-law, my cousin, among other people. Where it hurt me, or where I wish people had perceived me differently, is when I had to sit down and tell them, instead of saying, you know what, you're human, you tried, this is great. And a lot of these people were in my church. People that were in my church, I was their pastor, I was their boss, I was all these things. And when I had to say, listen, I don't have a job for you anymore, it went from you're the greatest guy on earth a week or 2 ago to you're the biggest jerk. Yeah, you're trash, you're awful. And I would say that was hard for me because sometimes when you're a leader, you have to give news to people that they don't want. That is part of leadership. And so in that moment, often they identify the news with you as a person or the action with you as a person. And I wish that people had a better ability to parse that out and say, wait a minute, this person cares about me. This situation is caused because of whatever happened. So that's an area that I've experienced, and I would have hoped that I would have been viewed different.
But then how easy was it for you to have those tough discussions? I mean, the thing is that people probably viewed you in that light because they felt like you could maybe have made a different decision?
I don't have an answer for that. I know how I was in those discussions. I was tearful. I was saddened. I was heartbroken. My best friend had ripped me off for millions of dollars in business. And now people that I cared about and I felt responsible for, I was having to just kind of release and let them figure out on their own. And so I don't know that in that moment, I mean, I was there. Like, there was no other answer. Everybody saw that. Everybody knew that. But that was still the response that they gave.
And then how did you feel with your best friend ditching you like that? I mean, like, surely that was probably more painful than the fact that you had to then stand up and have those discussions, because and then you had to be dealing with something whilst still delivering a message to people, which not only probably made you get further into a hole.
Well, the people that I shared that news to, I felt bad for. My partner, I felt bad because of. And that's the difference.
Yeah.
Like, I had empathy for them. I had pain from him. Empathy is a shadow of somebody else's or an essence of somebody else's pain. That's all empathy is. But when you feel the pain of somebody who, we'd been in a room 6x6 waiting for checks to come in the mail so we could pay our bills, and then here we are, a year and a half, 2 years later, whatever, 4 years later, all that we had built together, he just kind of took for himself. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a lot harder. It's definitely a lot harder to be hurt by somebody than to feel the hurt that you're causing somebody else.
But then there's an element of sort of a leadership, the unseen dirty side of leadership, right? So people that you're leading always or typically feel like a victim of being led. So, when you're breaking the news to someone, they feel like, what a jerk, DM.
A leader can be right 1,000 times and wrong once, and they're considered a bad leader.
Yeah. But then how do you then cope with that? I mean, like, because that's tough. That's horrible.
I mean,
like, how do you cope with that?
I mean, you just got to keep moving. I mean, if you need a little bit of an emotional break and, whatever, I'll be honest, it took me 6, 7 years, maybe even more, maybe 8 years before I opened up my own business again. I just did very small projects, my own small personal companies where I would just lifestyle businesses, or I did some consulting work. So I was burnt for a while to be able to just jump right. I didn't go start a new business the next day. Now I built up that tolerance. Now think about it. When that happened in my 20s, I mean, I was tearful. I was crushed. Now it happened in my mid-40s, 20 years later, and I was just like, yep, knew this was coming. All right, what are we going to do? Let's do that podcast thing. All right, let's go. So had I not had that happen in my 20s, I wouldn't have built the resilience to be able to bounce back and see what I'm seeing in my 40s.
But, and this is one major aspect about leadership, about growth, about anything really, is about the idea of something bad happens to you, and then it's really bad, and you feel like the world's sort of crumbled or sitting on your neck, and then over time you realize that experience has really brought a lot to your own self, more so than anything else. What would you say about your ability to develop resilience over time, the experiences in hindsight, looking back at them, and how they have helped you build resilience over time, and the importance of actually building resilience?
So I think that goes back again to my childhood, the things that we went through. My 6th grade year, I went to 7 schools and moved 9 times. We were moving, we were here, we were there. My mom, from what I can tell now, we were moving to a place. She wouldn't pay the rent. A month or two there, they'd kick us out. We'd go to the next place, and we would do that. So building up resilience is something that I think that when these things happen to you, it's really a matter of choice and time. Because I think we think, well, if I choose not to be hurt, I'm just not going to be hurt. But it's not that easy. Hurt is hurt. That's just like saying, I got stabbed in the neck. I choose not to bleed. Well, you can choose not to bleed all you want, but you're in trouble. And so it's like the same principle to me, right? It's okay if I get hurt in a situation like that and I need to recuperate, I need to heal, I need to kind of give myself time and then get back up and keep moving. The key in resilience is not that you never have to stop. It's that you always stop stopping and get back up and keep going. And that's the difference in resilience.
Wow. But then now I'm asking the practical, like surely the idea of always not stopping, the idea of constantly moving sounds easy. Are there
Well,
any?
what I said was sometimes you do have to stop,
Fair enough.
but you can't stay there. So
Okay.
that's, so you do have to stop and heal and regroup and rebuild yourself over time. And sometimes it's for a few months, sometimes it's for a few years, but you will have to stop. But the key is not staying stopped and getting back up and eventually, okay, it's time to start moving again.
And would you say out of the two experiences, which one was your most lowest point? I mean, like where you hit sort of rock bottom. And the reason I ask that is the follow-up question is when you were there, what helped you ensure that you were able to move? Because I think the idea of moving is just the most difficult part of anybody's sort of experience.
So when like back years ago, because you said which of the two, you asked me a multi-part question, so I want to make sure. So you mean of the two partnerships ending,
Yes.
which was harder? I would say my first one, because I was in my mid-20s, because I had thought like, I've solved life. I've got X amount of dollars already coming into my bank. I'm going to build up this next one and have even more. Like, life is good. And then all of a sudden, all that was gone. I went from making $400,000, $500,000 a year in my early 20s, in the early 2000s, late 90s, to making 30, 40 grand. You know what I mean? So it was just like, it was just a completely like, and I got back up where I needed to. But the point is like, you have something like that taken away from you, especially at such a young age. You feel indestructible when you're young. You know you're not indestructible, but you should keep moving when you're older. And I think that's the difference.
Wow, that's interesting.
So I'd say the first one was much harder because I didn't have, it was just like when the first time you benched 200 pounds, it's probably a lot harder than the 50th time.
Yeah.
It's just like same principle.
And then I'm very curious around the idea of the authoritative positioning. Because, well, first and foremost, what is authoritative positioning? Let's start there.
So it's a marketing principle, but I think it can apply to really every area of your life. So most people, when they think about positioning, branding, how they appear to others, and cultivating relationships, cultivating clients, what they think of is, I am going to exhibit how awesome I am. I have X amount of years of experience. I went to this school. I did this. The problem is that is an old style of positioning that people are used to and they don't respect it anymore. So what authoritative positioning does is it doesn't start from you to your desired destination of an individual or a client. It starts from the client or the individual, and you work out the path and the brand to you by serving them what they need in order to feel as if you are the solution to their problems. And let me give you an example of that. Let's say I'm a divorce attorney in Dallas-Fort Worth, and there's 1,000 divorce attorneys in Dallas-Fort Worth. So most people, they enter divorce lawyer, Fort Worth, they get, 50 pages with directories and everything else. But let's say for me, I know divorce is coming and I want the house, I'm in DFW. So what? I'm down. What's the coast there? Whatever the coast is in Texas. I'm just not remembering the name of the towns there, but whatever the, main coastal town, let's say I have a little house down there and I go fishing, 2 weekends a month. And I'm like, man, okay, we're going to get a divorce. How do I make sure I get to keep the lake? How do I make sure I get to keep the second house? So I type that in. How do I keep a second home in a divorce? So then this attorney has a podcast that talks about how to keep the boat, the second house. It specifically covers the issue. So now what are they doing? They're positioning themselves as an authority to help this person. Because I'm not just a divorce lawyer. I'm a divorce lawyer who helps people keep what they want, who helps men keep what they want, who helps high asset men keep what they want. Now I'm a very specialized individual for you, and that's what authoritative positioning is. It's ensuring that when people come to you, they see you as the authority because your marketing and your brand position has put you in that light to them. So instead of saying, which is I hear attorneys say this all the time that aren't my clients, first thing they say is, well, how much is this? How much is a divorce? Well, I talked to the last guy. His was 7K. Can you do it for like 5K? They're literally
Yeah.
price shopping attorneys. But with authoritative positioning, they come to you and they say, hey, man, I've been watching your podcasts. I've been listening. Well, yeah. How do I work with you? How can you help? Like, and they're not asking about money. If they are, it's what do you need? Not what are you going to cost me? And that's the difference in authoritative positioning. It's positioning yourself in the marketplace so that people come to you with a desire to work with you because you're the authority for the specific issue they have.
Time. How have you seen that idea of personal brand, authoritative positioning change with time? Because this does kind of feel, or in fact, you said that people don't respect anymore that I am great. That self egotistical pumping up, right? You are able to probably get more value through people seeing the value in you rather than you forcing it down their throat.
Right.
How have you seen that world has changed, and why? Why is that now something that is really kicking off?
So I'll tell you why. And I've worked with lawyers long enough to understand why. So if you think about just 1 or 2 generations ago, everybody was told when you grow up, you need to be a doctor or a lawyer. Right. Yeah. So there was a lot of or an engineer, but in U.S. society, it's mostly doctor, lawyer. U.S. society. Okay. So here we are. People have been saying this generation after generation. So there was a pedestal for those positions in society, and the doctor still has it. But here's what happened. The internet came in, and the internet started listing everybody within a 50-mile radius. So now, instead of it being, oh, there's a lawyer, it's like, oh, there's another lawyer. Actually, and if you think about it, like in the U.S., we have the highest concentration of lawyers to citizens. So we have the most competitive legal industry in the world. We are also the only major legal market, the U.S., that allows marketing like we do with attorneys. So, and that happened years ago. And so because of that, attorneys started marketing. And what did they start doing? I've been doing this for 27 years. I graduated from Harvard Business School or Harvard Law. I am on 4 committees. I won Super Lawyer of the Year 4 years in a row. And that used to work when people only saw 3 attorneys in their neighborhood. But when they saw every attorney within a 50-mile radius and they noticed that all of them had the same sort of credentials, now their authority declined because of commoditization. It's a very simple, like, we have a lot of lawyers. So guess what happens? Supply and demand. Now the supply has increased, the demand has stayed the same, but there's still not a lockup of it. So because of that, that's why we have seen the authoritative positioning change, because it used to be authority meant what you could tell other people you've done. Now authority means what you can tell other people you can do for them.
Yeah, gotcha. And then when you then have this sort of authoritative positioning perspective, do you feel like you're more likely to have a more transformative approach towards the way that you get results, or do you think that it's just a really good way of connecting?
I think it is going to transform your results because, again, it's not what you're thinking, it's what you're seeing. It's not what you want, it's what you see they want. So the customer journey is different, the way that you present yourself. And listen, I've been saying this for a couple of years now. Authenticity is the number 1 market mover. That's why we're going into founder-led marketing. That's why we're seeing this. So when people see an authentic leader who's real, who can help them, who is pinpointed down to what they need, now they're going to respond in a way that's positive for you.
And then would you then say, I mean, you've started another business, and now you're currently here. The current state of the world has a lot of the advancements, a lot of changes that are currently happening, whether you refer through technology, through politics, whether you refer to many different facets. How do you then stay relevant? How do you then, adapt and ensure that that brand, that personal brand that you're putting forward is relevant to the space and the way things are moving? Would you say that there's sort of tricks, tips, suggestions around what people should really be looking out for?
You asked like a 3-part question, so I'm trying to grab which part of that question do you want answered?
Okay. Hey, let me break that down. Do you feel like the world is changing a lot? And how then do people adapt to that change?
Okay. So I think the world is changing, but people aren't. At their core,
Okay.
people are still the same. They still want to feel safe. They still want to feel taken care of. They still want to feel clarity in their life. They still want to feel like they've got the best or the best option for them. Those things never change. So the message or the methodology doesn't necessarily change as much as the mechanism of delivery. Right? I think about, again, being in the ministry. We used to record our sermons and then hand out cassette tapes and have a little sermon series and be like, here you go. Here's a cassette tape. Listen to me. That's no different than me doing a podcast. It's just now the podcast is on the internet. I'm not handing people tapes. They're actually, they have to go click this or click that. So I think that the message and the methodology, again, like I said, isn't changing as much as the mechanisms by which we deliver them.
That's really interesting. Because in the end, there's this view that a lot is changing, a lot is moving, and so you then have to rebrand, then have to change. But what I've heard you say is essentially that how you distribute and disseminate that, there's an opportunity in that. The change actually offers you more so an opportunity than anything else. And then if I was to then talk about what would you say are the most simple steps for an individual to start working on their own personal brand?
Number one, identify who they want to be branding to. That's all. You always start at the finish line. The best illustration I can give, have you ever gotten one of those little mazes on a paper and it's got, 1,000 different ways to go? What's the easiest way to conquer that maze?
Backwards.
Start at the finish. Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet here everybody is trying to figure out their marketing programs, and they're trying this way and they're going down this little corridor and they're like, oh, dead end, let's try something else. And it's like, why don't you just start at your client and build backwards from it? So that's how I would suggest it.
That was number one. Number two.
So I would say how would I start my personal brand? Number one, I would do that. Number two, and I would start honing in on the aspects of myself that I think are going to resonate with my audience. So we all have different aspects, and not showing forth the different aspects of ourselves isn't disingenuous. It's like, I'm not taking my shirt off and running around out here. I live on an island. I could just, hey, this is who I am. This is just me. Look at my big old hairy chest and my big old belly. Look at me. Like, although it's true, it's not appropriate. So I think sometimes we see aspects of ourselves and we think, well, I got to include that. Well, I'm just kind of an asshole. Okay, well, why don't you temper that a little bit, right? Like, if that's your tendency, like, I know this about myself. I know I tend to come off too serious and I tend to come off intimidating to people with being too serious. Now you're like, how? Like, I'm talking to you. I'm not seeing that. But I have to, especially in like interpersonal interactions. Somebody asks me a question. Yes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you
like,
wanted a question. I gave you the answer. Yeah. They're just like, oh, sorry. And I'm like, no, I'm not upset. Why do you think I'm upset? Yeah, exactly. So it's the same principle. When we're doing a personal brand, we need to start looking at those aspects of who we are to start kind of, what is authentic for us to this crowd of people, or what aspect of who we are is going to resonate the most with them. If I'm a super analytical person and that's who my client is, I'm going to lean into that so that there's identification, so that there's natural progression towards me, that sort of thing. So that would be the second thing I would do, is I would begin to look at who I am and understand who I am in regards to who I want to work with and how those two match up.
And I've got two questions on a quick fire round. The first question is, what would you say is some of the most damaging elements to personal brand?
I think some of the most damaging elements is not being careful with your speech, with everything being recorded, and like pot calling the kettle black right now, right? I just kind of just say what I feel, but like, I'm not afraid to back up what I say, right? But I think sometimes people say things in public forums and they're in leadership and they don't think about how that little statement can be chopped up and resonate. How many people have you seen ruined by a soundbite in today's society? So I think that's something that's in leadership that we need to be a lot more cognizant of as we step in front of crowds, as we step in front of a camera, as we step onto an audio recording. Be cognizant of the fact that 3 years from now, someone could find this recording, chop up that little thing where you said, I hate all people with feet. And they're going to make you a feet hater the rest of your life, right?
And your life is ruined. Your life is ruined.
And it's true.
Yeah, no. And, we're like 20 years later, and like, oh, look at that feet hater over there. Oh,
yep.
But that's so crazy. But then that whole idea of that balance between that fear, that caution, that care with versus the authenticity. I mean, because that's where we then, you want to be as authentic as possible, but then you carry fear through a process. And what would you say about fear in personal branding, fear in authoritative positioning? How do those elements work for each other or against it?
I think you have to take your authenticity and put it through the filter of appropriateness. There's a time and a place. And so, you just have to be cognizant of where you are, who you're talking to, what's being said, what the context. That's just, it's leadership. It's just, we didn't have this sort of like reminder of leadership 20 years ago, but yet it's crucial now. You have to take and filter it through. Again, I could give you illustration after illustration after illustration. I work with all attorneys, right? Yeah. Now, this isn't something I do on every episode I do, but
I like
I'm
to be
tatted
different.
From...
Whoa, you're tatted? Yeah. What? I didn't see that coming.
I'm tatted from my wrist to my shoulder caps. I got 2 tattoos here, and I got a Sangkat tattoo from Thailand earlier this year.
Wow.
The prosperity and all of that from the Buddhist temple. So so I don't run onto an attorney stage or into an attorney thing and be like, hey everybody, let's go, and like show off my tattoos, right? So I think that's the kind of thing that it is authenticity through the filter of appropriateness. It's appropriate that I'm more dressed like this, but I'm still being myself.
Yeah. That is so interesting. And then that sort of talks to that idea of the balance of identity and then also, image, because it's not necessarily about losing one versus the other, but it's about what is most appropriate in a particular instance in time.
Exactly. Like I love cuddling my wife, right? I'm a cuddler. I'll go cuddle my wife on the couch, but like I'm not going to jump on some random couch and cuddle some random person, right?
Well, I'm
being authentic. I love to cuddle.
I thought DK and DM could I thought we bonded here. Now you're talking
are
about
you asking me for a cuddle session, DK? I think we just went into a whole new kind of podcast, my friend.
Nah, but you know what? I think the discussion has been so enlightening, has been so refreshing as well. And that just then leads me to the quote of this episode. And so the quote of the episode is, "I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it." The reason why this resonated so much for me and within this discussion is, even though you have had multiple businesses, even though your journey in building those businesses has not necessarily been smooth or easy. Quite frankly, you talk about the first instance where your best friend sort of dumped you and then left you with a pile of issues where you had to then terminate or fire people who not only believed in you, but who you felt a sense of responsibility to. You did it in a tearful manner. It consumed a lot of your sort of emotional energy, but you had to do what you had to do. And even though they might not have appreciated what you were going through at the time, you went through that experience, you ensured that you kept moving, and more so than anything, you grew and learned from it, but you refused to be reduced by it. And that was then shown in the second instance when your next partner decided to exercise his rights to exit. And that didn't take you the whole 8 years. I think you said 4 to 5 years. Was it 4 to 5 years or 8 years?
It was like, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 years probably. It was quite a while.
And it didn't take you as long to recover from that moment. But in the end, you did bounce back, and you then took yourself into this new space that you're in. And again, the idea of rebranding, rebuilding, and continuously growing allows for you to find the opportunities, not only in those moments where things might be difficult, but also in the moments where things are going well. And I'm excited for you when you do come forward in the next year in January with the expert and authority, the two branches of the podcast and sort of your business, where you're going to the expert space and the authority space. And you know, some of these elements start from relatively early on when you're building resilience, and you know, from the ages of 8 to 13, living and growing up in a very tumultuous space. I think you highlighted two main things: the idea of taking care of others, where you were taking care of your mom and your sister, and also your ability to be hyper aware. And the reason why those two resonate so strongly within the leadership space is because I think when you're hyper aware, you identify, see many different facets of what's happening around you. There's a level of innate curiosity, innate curiosity that exists, that allows for you to learn and grow from any situation that you find yourself in. And it actually reduces the amount of, I'll call it ego, that idea that I know and therefore I don't need to be observant. I know and therefore I don't need to be attentive. That level of complacent doesn't exist. And I think it's a very healthy thing for a leader to have a level of humility, but also a level of curiosity that then really drives their ability to be hypersensitive, to be really conscious of what's going on around them. And then that idea of helping others. And you talked about how a leader's responsibility is really about being selfless. How do good leaders ensure that they are caring for others? And quite frankly, you can't fake that. That level of authenticity about genuinely trying to do best and do good for others serves right and serves well within the space. And I think you talked about that image versus identity when you started the second branch in Oklahoma, and in the end you had to fire a whole bunch of people, and that good news, bad news, you had no control on how they viewed you, and you then had to do what you had to do, and you then had to just carry the weight of being a leader. And sometimes people don't appreciate that being a leader, though you've not naturally, but you've over the years have a lot of touch points in building those muscles of being a leader, that now it really does come to you in a second thought, a second nature. I think that those moments where your image isn't, you can't control certain things, you can't control certain aspects, but you also refuse to be reduced. But even at times, you might decide to stop. You might decide to take a breather. And that is well within your rights. That is well understood in order for you to be able to bounce back. And those are some of the, for me, what I felt was so strong in the balance of pushing through, pushing on, as a person who grown up in a space where, yeah, you can get beaten if you don't do, if you don't do right.
Yeah.
Versus knowing that at times it's okay to stop. It's okay to, you don't choose the time to be hurt. You don't choose the time to bleed if you've been stabbed.
Right.
It happens when it happens, and you need to be able to take care of yourself so that you can grow up and bounce and not be reduced by the event, but rather to be able to keep moving and get up and be stronger, be better, and reinvent yourself. And I love that concept of authoritative leadership, because really, when you talk about bouncing back, I heard it's about the notion of how do I add value in a space? And that value in a space is to be appreciated by the person you're adding value towards, as opposed to you being boisterous and loud and arrogant in a sense. I am good, I am this, I am that, I'm great, and not necessarily about building a level of respect that then drives the whole process to recognition, to growth, to value creation and addition. And I think, though lawyers or attorneys really work well with your personality, that idea of they're no better people to really look at you and go, I'm gaining value in this space, and therefore retaining and connection then easily form within that, within that, within such a space. And we always talk about how the world is changing, but really at times what we view as change is not necessarily the biggest and the most important thing. The most important thing is sometimes people aren't changing that much. The spaces and the worlds that you connect and how you connect with people don't change. Maybe the means of which you communicate your message and how you communicate your message, how you gain that connection, how you deliver authenticity into a space, how you add value. Those things might change slightly, but really the nature of connection, the nature of value creation, those things haven't necessarily changed. And I'm going to now sort of just give the last couple points around what you view as some of the most important aspects, and that identify where you want to be at the end. Start with the end in mind. So what does that brand look like? Where you're trying to get to, and then work backwards. Typically you don't start the maze from the front and just power through. You go backwards and you identify where do you want to be at the end, and you sort of work back. So if you want to work on a personal brand, if you want to work on where your positioning sits within an industry, within a market, within an opportunity, you need to really understand where you want to get to, and you work your way backwards from there. And at times you get shocked when somebody rolls down their sleeves and show you sleeves of tattoos. What? This whole time we've been sitting here, you're tatted up the whole back, your whole front, like the whole thing. But the beauty about something like that is that not everything is appropriate at every moment. And you need to be able to identify when certain things are appropriate and when certain things aren't. And that doesn't mean that you're taking away from the authenticity, your identity, but it means that you're really adding value in the moments where you're most impactful. You're not just being reckless and careless about when you say something, how you say something, but it's really doing it with a large level of responsibility, a large level of care. And really, those elements of care and responsibility are built through experiences, through moments. And the key around any of those experiences, good or bad, is that you never allow an experience to reduce you, but rather you allow for the experience to change you, to grow from it. And more so than anything, you take your stake within society that you can be an authoritative leader, you can position yourself in an authoritative position, and you can personally brand yourself so that you can have maximum impact and maximum value. And that is reflected no more so than when you worked in corporate for 4 years. And though you are a salesperson, a great salesperson, you were led from a position which not necessarily was a leadership position. It was a position where you identified what impact, what value you can have over and beyond what box you'll put in. And I think it's been absolutely amazing to have you on this podcast today. And I really appreciate you taking the
Thanks, DK. Yeah, I mean, I'll say this, you kind of alluded to this through your ending, and I'll kind of wrap it up here for you, if that's okay. The question, and I get this question a lot, how did you go through, you went through as a kid? How did you go through, and I didn't go through my teen years. I didn't go through my, we all have our stories and our scars. So like people say, well, how did you do it? And it's like, why did you get back up? Like, you had said, well, you had that happen and then you got back up and had a business again a few years later. And it's like, to me, I'm like, well, what are my options? Like, if I'm not a leader, who am I? If I'm not helping others, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
If I'm not getting back up, where am I supposed to stay? On the ground? So it's like, I mean, you really got to look at the options of the moment. And to me, I don't find much merit in moving on because the only other option is to stay there.
Yeah. And that is the whole essence, is to keep moving. Don't stay stuck at any cost, at all costs. And your story has really been an inspiration. DM, any last words that you'd love to say?
Hey, I've enjoyed being on. I hope this is a help to people. I think ultimately, a leader is going to be a leader, right?
Yeah.
No matter what position or title they have, a leader is still a leader. Even when I didn't, like you talked about corporate, whatever. And that's what I think we need to understand about ourselves. We're always in that mode, whether we are acknowledging it or not.
Beautiful. And Jim, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
The easiest thing is LinkedIn, Dennis Meador, Dennis Meador. I imagine it'll be in the notes of wherever you're at on this.
At the bottom,
That's to get a hold of me personally. Kind of try to build a relationship with me because you liked what you heard. If you want to find out what I do and how I can help you, you're in the legal industry or you're in the authority space coming up in the new year. We're starting the Authority Podcast Network and the Expert Podcast Network. But if you're interested in that, go to the legalpodcastnetwork.com. All of our business stuff is there. Check it out and then reach out.
And I wanted to be podcast episode 100 that you attended.
Mm-hmm.
But sadly, I'm only 93-ish. So I'll try again.
I'll see you next week.
Yeah. or next week.
All right, my man. I got another meeting to jump into.
No,
I really appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you soon, man. Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by Transformation Leader. You can follow us at www.t4leader.com.